Vilis, Broker of Blood, is a 5 and 3 black mana legendary demon. He's an 8/8 with flying, who can pay 1 black and 2 life to give target creature -1/-1 until end of turn. And whenever you lose life, you draw that many cards. And if you don't think I'm going to abuse the hell out of that second ability, strap in, buckaroo! We're going on a wild ride. Hey up lads, I am Scrap Iron Steve and welcome to a deck tech which is long in the making. I've been gone for a while. It's a thing, I've been busy. This isn't a job, it's a hobby. Yeah, hey. And I'm finally getting back into my creative endeavours, so here I am. And I figured I would cover a deck which I love very dearly, my Vilis Broker of Blood deck. Or at least my ideal Villis deck. If you can't tell the fact that I am not at my playmat, I do not have this fully built yet. But it has been tested and tested and tested, and it is magnifico. So, on with the show, I guess. So what does the deck actually want to do? If you can't tell from Villis' effect, you want to draw cards. And in order to draw cards, what do? You lose a lot of life. In this deck, you lose an awful lot of life. Yeah, looking at the numbers on Moxfield, about a third of the deck has some form of effect that loses you life, so be careful. You do walk a fine line between drawing all the cards in the world and just dying in this deck, so you gotta be prepared for that. Sometimes you will just kind of die to somebody's stray lightning bolt. It happens. And usually it's quite funny, I'm not gonna lie. There's a reason I like playing this deck. That being said, all of that life loss is basically entirely detrimental unless you've got Villis on field, which, fine, but also can be a bit of an issue because of Villis' big fat 8 mana dumpy. Yes, 8 mana is a lot for your commander, especially one as integral to the deck as Villis is to this one, but that's why you just play a lot of ramp, innit? So when I say ramp in this deck, not all of it is your standard what you think of as ramp. I do have a couple of ritual effects and like mana cheating and a few things like that. But I'd say that's ramp. It gets Villis out quicker and that's really what matters. But regardless of that, what ramp actually is there in the deck? Well, you've got your standard stuff, you've got your Soul Ring and your Horde of Mana Rocks. In my case, it's Charcoal Diamond, Mind Stone, and realistically Everflowing Chalice as my 2 mana rocks. Wayfarer's Bauble is a semi-rock, and Pristine Talisman and again sort of Palladium Mirror at 3 mana. In all honesty though, with Mana Rocks, it's just kind of a season to taste kind of deal. You don't need to play anything specific. If you want to do your 2 manas, do your 2 manas. If you want to be based and do your 3 manas, go do your 3 manas. We also have land fetches in the form of Myriad Landscape, Solemn Simulacrum, and again, Wayfarer's Bauble. So again, more of your standard stuff. But here is where we get into the spicy ones. So first off, Dark Ritual, which yes is a one-time thing, but when your commander's 8 mana, you sometimes need that one-time thing. And the other ritual that I play is semi-ritual. It's Scourge Familiar, which allows you to discard a card and add a black mana, which, in a deck that's drawing you as many cards as this, you're gonna like Scourge Familiar. You don't even need stuff that cares about discard, frankly. You've just got enough cards in hand that it's just a ridiculous mana source. I love it. And now the cost reducers, which is where the real fun comes in. So first off, we have Heartless Summonings, which yes, does make your creatures get -1/-1, but they also all cost 1 less, so even like the 1 toughness things, which I don't actually think there are many of in this deck, sure they die, but your 8 mana commander is now a 7 mana commander, and that's really what you care about, frankly. Then we've got Marshland Bloodcaster, who allows you to tap her, pay 1 and a black, and then pay life, rather than the mana cost for the next card you're going to play. So, you know how Heartless Summoning made Villis 7 mana? Yeah, this makes Villis 2 and 8 life, but honestly you don't care. You're bleeding yourself dry anyway. And it gains the added bonus of drawing you a metric ton of cards when you've got Villis out on field, so I'd say it's pretty good. And then there's my sweet baby boy, the best of them all, Kirik. He turns all black mana into Phyrexian mana. Yes, please, give me more of that. That's good. That, yes. Ooh, love it. Don't have to pay for any black pips. Absolutely stupendous. He comes down on 4, and Villis comes down on 5 with him on field. Perfection. You draw a boatload of cards whilst Villis is on field, paying any black cost? Can you see why Kirik is, like, the best card in the deck? Well, not the best card, but certainly one of them. Now, speaking of drawing cards, that's kind of what the deck wants to do, so you're not just relying on Villis. You have a smorgasbord of different options, especially ones which draw you cards and lose you life, which therefore scale when you've got Villis on field. I think in this deck I have exactly one card that doesn't lose life when cards are drawn. And we've seen him already. Hey, sad boy. So yes, we do have a lot of cards which say, you draw a card and lose a life. Draw 2, lose 2. Scaling like that. We have your standard ones, Knight's Whisper, Sign in Blood, Blood Pact, those kind of things, but we're even dipping a little bit further into the tank in this deck. We're playing Foulmire Knight for Profane Insight. We're playing Dusk Legion Zealot. We're even playing the Eye of Vecna, which is a bit of a hint for a couple of cards later down the line. Shh, we'll get to him. Oh, and a special shout out to Stinging Study, which, no matter whether you're drawing 8 or 16 cards for 5 mana, is ridiculously good in this deck. We've even got this effect on a land with Castle Lochthwain. It's pretty good in a pinch, I have to say. Also, we are playing Arguel's Bloodfast Overgreed as a repeatable form of this effect, just because I like the earlier coming down, rather than the cheaper activation cost. It's just personal preference. Speaking of repeatable versions of this effect, turns out there's a couple of Planeswalkers with it on them. Lolth Spider Queen has it as a 0, and Obnixilis Reignited has it as his +1, which, I mean, if we're going to keep doing it every turn, I'm going to keep doing it every turn. I will say Obnixilis does have more utility, as his -3 can destroy a creature, and his ultimate reads that player loses the game, whereas Lolth's token creation and kind of mid-ultimate aren't great, but also, it's Lolth. I want to play Lolth. And she draws me a ton of cards, so I really can't complain. Now the next card is another all-star of the deck, because it just does so much, and that is Dread Presence, a card which should be a staple in every single mono black deck. Whenever you play a swamp, either you draw a card and lose a life, there are those magic words again, or you deal 2 damage to any target and gain 2 life, which, wow, it mounts up surprisingly quickly, is all I can say with that life gain, and it destroys targets. You can draw cards if you want. All-star. Absolutely fantastic card. And fun fact, it was the card that inspired me to make the deck when I pulled it alongside Villis in a M20 pre-release pack, so, well, hey. Then we have Treacherous Blessing, a weird little card from Theros Beyond Death, which draws you 3 cards on entering, and then whenever you cast a spell, you lose a life whilst it's on field, and there's a thing about sacrificing when it gets targeted. But in this deck, that's really not that bad. Like, it's supposed to be the punishment for drawing the 3 cards in the first place, but when you've got the inflated life totals of Commander, plus the life gain that we're going to see in a bit, and just Villis drawing you a card every time that life gets ticked down, this card is really, really effective. Which is not something I thought I'd ever say about it, but no, it's very, very good. And finally, for the draw spells, we have Peer into the Abyss, which, in essence, reads Win the Game in this deck. You're not gonna not play it. Now, if only the art weren't so abjectly horrifying. And it's at this point in the video you might be thinking, hang on, that is an awful lot of life loss. And you would be correct. And that is why I am playing a suite of life gain cards. Not a huge suite, I have to admit, because a lot of the deck is your life loss effect, but you're going to be drawing through your deck fast enough that you're going to be able to find these pretty regularly. And honestly, they do a lot of work. If it's not already pretty self-evident, survivability can be a big issue in this deck, because, you know, you're losing a lot of life, and people on the other side of the table go, ooh, you've got 15 life. That's enough to kill you in one swing. And that's where your issues come in, and that's why we've got life gain in this deck. So first off, we have a trio of little tiny artifacts, which gain you a bit of life every time you cast a black spell, with a couple of them having a little bit extra on the side, those being Prism Ring, Demon's Horn, and Staff of the Death Magus. At first glance, these effects might look pretty underwhelming, but let me tell you, it makes everything you do in this deck significantly more sustainable. I mean, just being able to break even on those draw a card, lose a life spells is absolutely huge. And especially when you take into account Death Magus's triggering on a swamp, or Demon's Horn triggering on other people's black spells, the life begins to accrue incredibly quickly, especially when you've got them in multiples. Kind of adjacent to these small life gain, small mana cards, you have Ivory Tower and Revenge of Ravens. Ivory Tower may seem quite similar to these previous ones, but let me tell you, with the amount of cards you can be drawing in this deck, you're going to be gaining much more than 1 life per turn. And in regard to Revenge of Ravens, it honestly doesn't often gain you life, but that's only because it's such a fantastic deterrent against all these big mana, big tokens kind of decks. And honestly, you need that protection when you're always at 15 life. But hang on, I'm talking about mono black life gain. I think there's a man I've neglected to mention. That's right, of course I'm playing Gary. It's mono black and I like my life. And I am playing a couple of his slightly less powerful siblings, though that's not to say that they're weak at all. Thrall Parasite and the Pontiff of Blight. These extort kind of effects are so powerful in this deck, and gain you just so much life just like that, I mean, you have to. And now for the extraneous bits and bobs of life gain that I'm playing in this deck. Now, I've already mentioned Pristine Talisman and Dread Presence, but there are a couple which I have neglected to mention up until this point, those being Elixir of Immortality and Erebos' Intervention. Now, I'm going to talk about Intervention a bit more when we get onto removal, but the Elixir of Immortality is a very intriguing card in this deck, because honestly, you can deck yourself out pretty easily, and the Elixir of Immortality gets you both that little bit of life to stop you from dying in one way, and your whole graveyard back into your library to stop you from dying in the other way, which I think is pretty neat, especially for, 3 mana? That's all pretty good. Of course, on the flip side of the life gain coin, there is also the cards that are simply dedicated to losing your life. And there are a few of those in this deck. We don't need too many of those in this deck, just because our draw, our removal, all the things we'd be playing anyway, already loses us life. But the ones that are here, dedicated to this life loss, are some of the best cards in the deck. First off, there is Dreadhorde Invasion. To be honest, this is in this category because I didn't know where else to put it, but it's your poor man's Bitter Blossom, and I am the poor man, so I'm playing Dreadhorde Invasion. It loses me a life every upkeep to make this one guy just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And frankly, I quite like that, especially when there's the incidental lifelink that kicks in later on. I would be playing Bitter Blossom if I could, but that card is expensive. And now onto the true, just delicioso pieces of life loss. Those being Blood Celebrant, Wall of Blood, Unspeakable Symbol, and Doom Whisperer. So, do you notice anything in common about these cards? Maybe perhaps that their life loss is not tied to a mana cost? Aside from Blood Celebrant, but it's basically free. Say hello to your suite of Grizzlebrands with upside. It's cards like these which are the reason you want to play the deck. And one of them's goddamn Wall of Blood. I'd say out of these, probably Unspeakable Symbol is the least effective, but that's like saying, I don't know, a nuclear bomb is less effective than a hydrogen bomb. The main reason I'm saying this is because you have to pay life in instances of 3, which definitely not the worst thing, and very easily mitigated by the +1/+1 counters. But there are times in this deck where you actually do want to get down to exactly 0, and you can't pay life that you don't have. So the 3s can be a little bit awkward, and that is where your Wall of Blood and your Blood Celebrant come into this lovely equation, as they can get you down to that 0. But they are certainly not the most effective of these 4. Doom Whisperer might be the best card in this deck. For one thing, it's a flying, trampling 6/6, which is already amazing. But then you get to the pay 2, Surveil 2. You see, Villis will get you to draw 2 cards when you pay that 2 life. But the Surveil 2 comes in first. You get card selection with this on top of that. Imagine if Griselbrand allowed you to look at those top 7 and then choose which ones you wanted before you drew them. That's Doom Whisperer. That's what this card is in this deck. This card is insane, and I love it so much. And now back down from the high of Doom Whisperer, we go to removal! Removal, you don't want to play it, but it is necessary so you can win in a game of Commander, because otherwise you'll just let other people go off and do their thing and they'll probably win instead. But you're mono black. You're fine. You've got so many lovely removal options. Unless it's an artifact, but shh. And honestly, this section isn't quite as creative as I've been with quite a few of the rest of them. You've got your pretty standard removal spells in here. I've got Defile, Dread Presence and Ob Nixilis make their lovely grand return. Infernal Grasp, that loses your life. It's nice. Same with Feed the Swarm, removes an enchantment as well. Fantastic. Murderous Rider does have some extra little synergy with the deck, as you're not just going to be casting Swift End. Rider himself has lifelink, and you often need that life. See, not all of this deck is the big creative woo that I'm making it out to be. But there are some little bits of tech and spice in here that I do also want to mention. So, as mentioned before, we have Erebos' Intervention in this deck, and I didn't really include it in the life gain section just because it feels a lot more relevant here. Yes, it's an X spell and you can waste quite a lot of X on it, but you're going to be in big mana anyway. Your commander is 8 mana, for God's sake. And frankly, I find the flexibility of this card to outweigh the potentially quite high mana cost, just because you can pay less and exile quite a few things from an opponent's grave at instant speed, or for just a little bit more, get rid of an opponent's creature and gain some life, all the while dodging Indestructible and things along that ilk. Then you have Font of Agonies, which is pretty self-explanatory in this deck, let's be real. It's a deterrent, it always has counters on it, people don't want to try and hit you because you've got the big glowing thing that says don't hit me. And then the final removal spells I am running are a couple of bits of nice tech for this deck. Reckless Spite, and the card it is based off of, Ashes to Ashes. Both cards remove 2 creatures from the field for the cost of 1 black and 5 life. The big difference being that Reckless Spite is instant speed and destroys, whereas Ashes to Ashes is a sorcery speed exile, and I find that both have a wonderful place in this deck. And while I'm at it, I'm going to mention one of the 2 board wipes we've got in this deck. The other one I shall mention a little bit later. The one I'm going to talk about now is Mutilate, and I'm not really going to have to say much about Mutilate because it's just such a good card. It dodges Indestructible, it works based off of the number of swamps you have, you're in mono black, and it comes down at only 4 mana. I think it's pretty fantastic. And now speaking of removal, we aren't the only ones playing it, so I think we need some protection effects in here. And you see, in this deck we're actually playing 2 different types of protection. A little bit for Villis, and a lot more for me. Because you're on a low life total a lot of the time, so you need those things just to stop you from taking that extra 5 damage and just dying. So first up, there is the stuff for Villis himself, which is Kaya's Ghost Form, Swiftfoot Boots, and Blessing of Leeches. Ghost Form and Swifties don't really require much explanation, they're just really good, cheap protection effects, which Villis very much appreciates. Blessing of Leeches, on the other hand, is a bit more out there. It's a flash enchantment, aura, which you essentially just put onto Villis, and at the beginning of your upkeep you lose 1 life, and you can pay 0 to regenerate him, which, free card draw every upkeep, and infinite regenerates. I think it's worth its spot. And now on to the me protection, of which some I've already mentioned, Revenge of Ravens, Elixir of Immortality, that kind of thing, but there are a couple of effects which I love to play in any deck that I can find. Lich style effects. For those of you who are uninitiated, Lich effects are effects that let you live at 0 life or less. It's this kind of weird bullshittery that makes me love Magic. And the 2 Lich effects that I'm playing in this deck are Pact Weapon and, funnily enough, Lich's Mastery. They're both very strange cards, and I love them dearly. So Pact Weapon is an equipment that so long as it's attached to a creature, you don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. It's fun like that. But also, when a creature attacks you, draw a card and reveal it. This is the equipped creature. The creature gets +X+X, and until end of turn you lose X life, where X is that card's mana value. That's a fuck ton of card draw in this deck, especially if you're just attaching this thing to Villis. And its equip cost is discarding a card. Oh no, Packed Weapon is fantastic. And now for the infamous Lich's Mastery, which I'm just going to read you the card. It's very strange. So it's a legendary enchantment with hexproof. You can't lose the game. Whenever you gain life, draw that many cards. Whenever you lose life, for each 1 life you lost, exile a permanent you control or a card from your hand or graveyard. When Lich's Mastery leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. What the bloody hell did I just read? One of the best effects in the deck is what I just read. Because, well, you can't lose the game. Gaining life draws you cards, which it's drawing cards, and sure, when you lose life, which is a lot of what this deck is about, you exile a permanent you control or a card from your hand or graveyard. That's honestly fine, because you've just lost life, so you're drawing cards. You kind of go equal on that effect. You're Gucci, frankly, and it feels stuff like Sir Conrad and whatnot, so I can't really complain. Oh yeah, and for those of you who are here from the Affinity for Commander video, where this card put in a fuck ton of work, hi! For those of you who aren't, I'll link it in the description. You'll get to see, essentially, this card go off. And now we've been through the bones of the strategy, what makes the deck tick, I think it's time for the big, fun payoffs. The reason you're playing this deck. How do you win? And the answer to that is a lot of different ways. But first, I'm going to take out a pin that I put down earlier in a certain card called the Eye of Vecna. Yes, folks, we are playing the full suite. The Eye, the Hand of Vecna, and the Book of Vile Darkness. We can make the man himself. So the Hand is a win con in and of itself. It makes your stuff enormous. You usually put it onto Villis. Let's be real here. Commander damage is a bastard. But also it can double your hand size if you equip it using that secondary equip cost. And while the book honestly isn't that great in this deck, it's the thing that facilitates making Vecna, and you've already got the Eye and the Hand, they synergize so well. I couldn't not put it in. I know it's wasting a slot in my 99, but come on, it's Vecna! And while we're taking pins out of things from earlier, Sickening Dreams is the other board wipe that I'm playing. The ability to do damage to not just each creature but each player, depending on the amount of cards you discard, is absolutely backbreaking, especially when you're playing stuff like the Lich effects, or, I don't know, Peer into the Abyss? Yeah, this thing gets very dumb very easy and can easily just wipe a table. It's even only 2 mana, it's ridiculous! Next up, there's Mortarion Demon Primarch, who, I'm gonna be real, he's not hard to explain. You're losing a load of life, he's an army in a can, and he can make a lot of Astartes every turn. And then Sir Conrad the Grim, who might not feel like he fits in this deck at first glance, because it's not like aristocracy or anything like that. But then you remember he can trigger off discarding to hand size, or the bullshittery I'm doing with Lich's Mastery, and yeah, he fits in nice and dandy. And now for some of my favourite cards. Psychosis Crawler. Oh boy, Psychosis Crawler. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses a life. This thing is so strong in this deck, because you're just drawing so many cards. And also, very funny, because it's like a really weird Brash Taunter effect in this deck, if you've got Villis out at least. Because somebody hits you for damage, you draw that many cards, and then Psychosis Crawler deals that amount of damage to everyone. Or you do stuff with Doom Whisperer, Unspeakable Symbol, and the opponents just die. Yeah, Psychosis Crawler is very, very strong. And then there are the true meme kills of this deck. Repay in Kind and Profane Transfusion. Think about it. There's a reason I'm playing Lich effects in this deck. You go down to below 0, and then cast a Repay in Kind. It's truly, truly beautiful. And yes, Profane Transfusion only hits one opponent, but you also get a big dingus out of it. So I don't care. And yeah, these are so fun in the deck. I cannot recommend them enough. And yeah, that's the deck tech. I did neglect to mention lands, but frankly,
you're playing mono black, you choose. You can play utility lands and swamps. Boom, there's your lands. And yeah, that's Villis. I love this deck. It's one I can just pick up and play, and I think I just turn my brain off and just want to draw cards whenever I do. It's great fun. And I do also want to give thanks to Martin and Alex from Affinity for Commander for, well, letting me showcase the deck on their channel. It's a less optimised version, as I mentioned in the Lich's Mastery segment, but you'll get a good feel for how the thing runs. And yeah, I think that's everything, so I've been Scrap Iron Steve, and I'll see you folks later.
Oh, bugger, right, there's a Moxfield link in the description if you want to have a check out of the deck. Right, now properly, see you later.